Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum podcast. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Hussein Aboubakr Mansour, a Milstein Writing Fellow at the Middle East Forum, an analyst focusing on Muslim antisemitism, Islamist ideology, and the American universities, join us to discuss October 7th and the left. Mr. Mansour will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Hussein Aboubakr Mansour.
Thank you very much, Stacey. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and thank you very much for all the audience who tuned in today. Since the horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas on October 7th, and the explosion of what seems to be a populist leftist support for this kind of terrorism in many American institutions. Of course, ground zero for this are the universities, but it also went to really all other American institutions over the country, given the reach of the left in American life today. And I think this cause for a lot of people, it was shocking, surprising. A lot of people have been familiar with what has been termed, I believe, since the 60s or not the 60s, the 70s, really, the Red-Green Alliance or the Islamo-leftist alliance. I think while this was a kind of in the background of their head, still the level of a support and just a complete almost identification of many of the leftist activists, people who pride themselves on being the harbinger of progressive ideology and progressive values, specifically talks about issues such as sexualities, women, things that are anathema to Islamic and Islamist movements worldwide. This has seemed to be bizarre, explainable only maybe by hatred towards the West. Many times it's reduced into just, hatred towards the West and so on. Some of the different explanations that were provided for this were that this is a marriage of convenience. So this is something that's just driven by opportunism. It's temporary. Both really hate each other. If the leftists go to Gaza, they will be beheaded by Hamas. If the Islamists found out about the nature of the sexual ethos of people on the left, they will be horrified. So it's kind of this explanation is provided. Another explanation is basically the useful idiots a hypothesis, which is basically that Westerners on the left are good-hearted people with bleeding hearts for human rights and so on. They are just very misguided. They are driven by a passion for the oppressed. And since, of course, the story of Hamas or Hamas presents a story in this Western parlance of oppression and the oppressed and the colored people, so the immediately able to capture that sentiments or the sympathies of many people who are progressive and even many people who are liberal. I will provide or advance a different explanation today. And that doesn't mean that the other explanations are not correct. I think actually, usually as it is the case with any complex social interaction or social development, you have everything happening at once, and many things are happening at once. You have a level of political opportunism that's not necessarily in one party. It's probably in both parties of this equation. You have a big level of gullibility. You have a generation of college students who are indoctrinated into not even the thought of the left, but the slogans of the left, social justice, equality, anti-racism, so on and so forth. And they probably know nothing about the conflict. They have no idea which river or which sea. And there are the famous video that went viral the other day showing how many college students don't even know which river and which sea. So this is true. But there are also other elements that I think it's time for us to explore more, which is the actual influence and actual confluence of Western revolutionary thought of the left and Islamist ideology, and how actually in the past decades, since the 1980s, they became actually closer in their nature and their intellectual formation or intellectual structure than many assume. When Hamas started, or when Hamas broadcasted their videos online of the October 7th attacks, those horrific videos of the Hamas GoPro fighters carrying the GoPros and going to those Israeli houses and murdering people, Hamas had its slogan on the video. They had a little emblem. They had the emblem of the Hamas Office for Propaganda, whatever that is called. But he also had a big slogan imprinted in the video, and that was the revolution, Thawrat Muqawm, or in Arabic, or the revolution of those who resist. And then after the videos were broadcasted and official Hamas statements started to come out, one could see that the prevalence of anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, and anti-racist, third worldist language. Now, it's well known that usually the statements by these kind of movements are they have two different natures when they are in Arabic than they are in English, and this is true. So in the statements of Hamas that they actually broadcasted in Arabic immediately after the attacks, one could find clearly a complete merging between Islamic language and motifs, the language of Islamic warfare or traditional hatred for the Jews, mixed with this revolutionary anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, anti-Westernism, and so on. If you see the statements in English, you will find that the former became completely absent. So the Islamic motifs and Islamic themes become completely absent and from the English language publications or broadcasts or statements of Hamas. It becomes more reliant on the anti-racist, anti-colonialist, and anti-imperialist language. Here, this, I think, drives a lot of people to immediately reach for the opportunism or the kind of deception argument that they are deceiving the Western audiences. I actually don't think so, because while actually, yes, the Arabic is heavily or actually completely formed by Islamic language and Islamic medium, it actually still contains a lot of the same anti-colonialist and anti-imperialist language. And this actually comes from the fact that Hamas's ideology is less the pure Islamic continuation of the Islamic tradition that Hamas claims it to be, than it is really influenced by the revolutionary ideologies that dominated the Middle East in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where Hamas was formed. Now, people on the left, especially on the academic left, often know this. They often know that a lot of Islamic movements in the world are a hybrid Islamic left ideological formation. As a matter of fact, one of the books that kind of fascinated me in the way that it was able to capture this in a way that is missed by a lot of people. It's actually a book written by Robert Malley himself. Robert Malley is a famous envoy to Iran. He's one of the strongest pro-Iran, pro-resistance Axis movement in DC. When he was still in his early academic career in the early 90s, before he goes to the Clinton administration, he actually wrote a really good book on Algeria. It's called The Call from the Third World, and it gives a historical story of the rise of third worldist revolutionary Algeria, starting from the War of Liberation with the French up until the Islamic insurgency of the 90s, which is the context in which the book was written. And by the end of the book, Malley was very clear in saying that basically this is not really a continuation of Islam. This is not jihad coming back from the history books to haunt us or anything. No. This is just a new level, not a new level, a new stage of the third world Marxist revolution, but just taking now Islamic motifs. Of course, people like Malley, he didn't say that as a condemnation of that revolution. He actually said that as a way of endorsing it, And he continued well into the 2000s, insisting that Hamas and Hezbollah are social movements that should be embraced. Before him, you had people like Judith Butler, who openly said that she thinks Hamas and Hezbollah, she's a famous gender theorist, that Hamas and Hezbollah are parts of the international left. Somebody like Noam Chomsky, you'll find a lot of statements. And I do believe that those people were right. I actually think that my own side of the table has been wrong on this. We are the ones who assume that they are some delusional Westerners, naive. They don't know what they are talking about. Those Islamic terrorists are going to eat of all of us. But I think they knew something that we actually didn't know, which is that the nature of the formation, the international formation of the left is much larger and much more diverse in its own adaptation of this revolutionary framework than we think. Now, this support does translate to direct support for movements like Hamas itself. This happens whether moral support through big programs of big efforts of propaganda, ideological support that is given to them extensively. For example, what we have seen in the Western media and the Western universities since October 7th is exactly that. You have a massive campaign of support translated into actual protests in the street, many times pulling leverages of political pressure on Western politicians to pressure Israel to end the war quickly, to pressure Israel to stop its military operations. So we're actually looking at a tangible support that is coming outside of this big machine or the supply chain of the international left, but not just a mere pressure and ideological indoctrination for many people in the world over. We're also talking about material support. Think about the amount of NGOs, which are typically solidly present within the sphere or the hemisphere of the international left that provide tangible, actual material support to the Palestinians, whether in the West Bank, whether in Gaza, the people who insist on funding UNRWA, the people who staff the international institutions, international organizations, the international NGOs that coordinate programs of financial support that ends up going to places like Gaza, despite of pressures from people in the United States who have wanted to stop this support that aids terrorism ultimately, despite of pressure from the Israeli government, despite here in the United States, you had people in the on Capitol Hill, Republicans in the House and in the Senate have been always wary of these kind of supports that go. Yet this support continues because it has a big parts of the international left really pushing for it. Now, the last part that I'm going to talk about is, okay, there is a relationship, there is support, but why does the left do this? How about throwing gays out of rooftops, which Hamas occasionally does, as everybody knows? This has to do with the way of thinking or the way of analysis, whether economic or political analysis, or the structure of analysis that actually defines the left as an intellectual formation. Back in 1967, 2 months after the Six-Day War, the Monthly Review magazine. Now, the Monthly Review magazine is very important historically. Monthly Review is the longest running a Marxist or communist, really, a publication in the United States. It was started in the 1940s by Paul Sweezy, one of the foremost American Marxist theorists. Its inaugural issue was introduced by Albert Einstein. He wrote it, in the first its first editorial, Why Socialism. It was a really big deal for a very long time. It declined in importance starting from the 1970s as pretty much every university press in the country became a Marxist publishing house, but it remains to be it has a very important legacy. In 1967, Paul Sweezy, which is the founder, who's the founder of the publication, wrote an essay about right after the Six-Day War, saying why the Six-Day War matters for them in the Monthly Review, and not, let's say, the Pakistan-India war that could have ended in a nuclear show-off a few months before. And he said that basically that this conflict, the war with Israel, defines the epoch, or it's the epochal, the struggle of the epoch, which means it's right at the center of the global struggle against capitalism and against the United States. You can find the article, I'm sure, online if you look for it. Now, the Monthly Review, in their editorial this month, February, so the new issue of the Monthly Review that was published actually publishing in February, the editorial doubles down on this and saying that the Palestinians, and I'm almost quoting here, are the forefront of the struggle against capitalism and against the United States. And their struggle defines the struggle of everyone for freedom all over. So basically, the struggle against Israel it means the end of oppression of everybody everywhere. As ridiculous this may sound, this actually comes from a very coherent logical processes inside the ways of the thinking of the left and the analysis of the left that is ultimately structural. And believes that since really this is a struggle within a structure of power, then that defines all of the structure of power. So basically, the situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis defines all of the Middle East, and then that defines the entire international order that is dominated by the United States. And thus, it's right at the core of mobilizing people against all of the enemies of the left today, which is capitalism and so on and so forth. I'll stop here. I know that I ran a little bit over time, but I then would like to have questions from the audience.
No problem at all. I'm sure others will agree. We could hear you talk all day. So here's a question from Anaf Kalam from Middle East Forum. Given that Hamas's revolutionary ideology diverges slightly from the more conventional Salafi jihadist ideology held by other terrorist groups, what is the perception of Hamas among groups like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda?
Well, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State are different. So Al-Qaeda actually, the Palestinian or Palestine as a symbol was right smack at the middle in the origins of Al-Qaeda. Actually, in the papers of bin Laden, if you actually go through a lot of the publications of bin Laden, some of the internal letters of the bin Laden family, I remember and I wrote an essay about this recently. He said, and again, I'm quoting almost literally here, I started everything because of Palestine. And if you actually look at a lot of his statements, you'll find that all of it comes back into the U.S. support for Israel as the primary reason for this global jihad against that he declared against the United States. So Al-Qaeda was actually as related to these kind of revolutionary ideologies in their native transmutation in the Middle East than ISIS. ISIS is a much further down the line development from Al-Qaeda and Hamas. And ISIS holds, I think, the same tenets of Al-Qaeda and Hamas in terms of hating Jews, wanting to kind of, de-Judaize not just the Middle East, but the entire world, that level of pathological anti-Semitism. But then it diverges dramatically in the ways it conceives its priorities, its mission, and what it tries to achieve what it tries to achieve by prioritizing establishing their Islamic State, their caliphate, over fighting in Palestine. And that's been actually a very common jihadist and Islamist criticism against ISIS. Well, where's ISIS? Why are they not attacking Israel, our chief enemy? So there is a major divergence, but I would say that the divergence, we're conceiving it backwards. ISIS is the later development. Hamas and Al-Qaeda are the original development.
Understood. Thank you. Ira Strauss would like to know which is likely to be more useful, working to separate the Islamists from the leftists or working to weaken one or the other or both?
I don't know if there's a possibility of separation today. I think really we have to face the fact. That's a very liberal way of thinking. If you're thinking about, I want to separate this problem and deal with it, which is by what distinguishes the liberal way of thinking than the leftist way of thinking. And I think sadly, I think we've we have failed in educating people about the difference between both, to the extent that many people today, for them, the left and being a liberal, leftist and liberal are synonyms. A lot of people can't make the distinction. What does it really separate being a liberal from being a leftist? Some people, in order to make the distinction, they have to use all of kind of devices. Well, there is capital L liberalism, there's small L liberalism. And I think we've failed really. The liberal way of thinking thinks in terms of disparate problems. You see a problem, you isolate, you solve. There's a racism problem, comes from bigotry, bad heritage, we isolate it, we try to fix it, and so on. The left doesn't think that way. The left is a totalitarian, and here, I'm not using it as a polemic, truly defines their thinking. It thinks in terms of structural analysis. So if there's a problem, this problem is not isolated. It's really the entire structure. It tells you something about the entire structure. And this is how we get to, the whole United States is structurally racist, for instance. This is how we get to why the 4th of July fireworks are racist. Well, if you have a problem with racism, it's not a problem with racism. There's a structural analysis then that is built. So asking if you can separate this from that, it's a very liberal way of thinking, but I don't think it's actually possible at the moment. I do believe that both Islamists, and here I want to separate between Islamists and Salafist jihadists in the mountains, are now really united in this structure. They do have contradictions inside their movement, like any other movement, but I think it's almost at the moment it's almost impossible to separate. Especially if you look at the new generation of Islamists in the United States, you see this more clearly. I actually question if you can call a young Muslim pro-Palestine activist on college campuses today, if I actually sit with them, if I listen to what they are saying, if I actually analyze how they think, I would find it, for me personally, to be able to tell you if they are Islamist or leftist is a matter of splitting hairs. So we're now talking about today a merger that's been going on for quite some time, that you do have people who embody a complete synthesis of both.
Thank you. So JL here asks, are you saying that Hamas itself is not just an Islamist group, but a leftist Islamist group that incorporates elements of both sets of beliefs? Can you clarify on that?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's not just what I'm saying. So this is what I'm said here is that this is what people on the left have been saying for decades. And what I came to believe, I changed my opinion on this maybe 2 years ago. What I came to agree is to agree with them. Like, I think Chomsky is right. Judith Butler were right. Not that I agree with their philosophy. I'm not a leftist. I think their philosophy is destructive, but in the way they see political developments that happen in the world in the last 5 or 6 decades, I think to be completely honest, I think the liberals have been had. Liberal society has completely failed in actually seeing what was going on in the world, and they were much more tuned into the international developments because of the nature of the international left itself. Yes, I do believe that these Islamic movements, whether Hezbollah, as I said, Islamist specifically, that have their origins in the 70s and the 80s, I do believe that they are not Islamic in the way that a lot of us have been thinking about what that means. A category that is defined, that has a box, that has its own historical development, that I can trace it back to theological writings or Islamic legal writings from the 12th century. I don't think that's true. I think these are really modern movements that embody or synthesized both elements from decomposed Marxism or Marxism after its decomposition in the 1960s, and of course, elements from their own native cultures.
Thank you. Edward Lipson asks, where is Iran in the construct you are describing? It's hard to envision Iran as a leftist.
Iran, it's hard, but if Iran is a very predatory state. So there are many ways to talk about this. I can talk about geopolitical aspect, that basically the strategy, and when you have the power, and that's actually what I do believe. When you are in power, you're not a leftist, you're not a rightist, you're not a Muslim, you're not a Christian, you're not anything. Power is its own religion. That's honestly what I believe. And once you have power, that becomes your religion, that becomes all of your calculation. So if we're going to talk about Iranian strategy, I cannot ascribe Iranian strategy to ideology. I can maybe make ties between their ultimate objectives and ideology, and their ideological platform. That is, their objectives are tied to it, but their strategies are not. And their strategies have to do with their first of all, it has to do with the concrete political situations that they are in, because they have to deal with the real world by the end of the day, and about their immediate needs in terms of self-preservation, predatory behavior in the region. If I'm going to talk about the ideology of the Islamic Republic itself, yes, it is to a large extent, it is also a hybrid ideology of both the left and Islam. The rule of the jurisprudence, which is the governance theory of Ayatollah Khomeini, is really just an Islamification of the rule of the intellectuals, which is really the Marxist way of ruling that was really epitomized in the Communist Party. Now, these are bigger in discussions, I think, than just this webinar would allow. And also, I don't know how much relevant they are to concrete political developments. I mean, they interest me because I'm interested in the how actually things happen, knowing how things happened. I think they are very important in terms of clarification and in terms of the actual ideological relevance to people in the street. But when it comes to political developments, I think we better understand Iran as a powerful hegemon that now is eyeing a serious opportunity to flip the Middle East from the U.S. domination. I think it's very clear that this is the Iranians may be considering this moment their opportunity, and I think it's better to understand their steps in that light.
Understood. Thank you. Joseph Levin would like to know, is it really this resonance with this revolutionary theory with Islamists, or is it more simply just the pathological hatred of the Jews, probably sometimes not even known?
Well, I don't see why it has to be one or the other, right? So if you can follow me on Twitter, I just published a screenshot from the as I said, the monthly review editorial on the issue. Now, the monthly review, as I said, they're talking about a long-standing communist publication. There is no doubt that the people who work there are militantly atheistic. I mean, they are religious in the ways that people on the left are religious. They believe in eco-socialism and nature and the avatar blue people and things like that. But they are traditionally they are very atheistic. And many of them, I would not be surprised if many people on the editorial board that wrote this were actually from Jewish backgrounds themselves. If you actually read the essay, when it says that the struggle of Palestine is a struggle of all humanity, it's what defines the current struggle of all humanity against oppression. It's an intellectualized, it sounds, one of the ways that I could describe this as an intellectualized way to say, well, the salvation of mankind is getting rid of the Jews, right? Like all of mankind, all of its oppression all over will end if this Jewish cancer ends. So one of the ways that I could think about this, and then I have to ask the question, is this really just a leftist intellectual sophisticated pathology, or is it just anti-Semitism in another garb? To be completely honest, I personally don't know. I can't tell you. Sometimes I feel it's that. Sometimes I feel it's the other. Sometimes I feel it's both together. I personally stopped even looking for motives, because motives will always be opaque. I mean, by the end of the day, you're going to speculate on someone's motive, and that's why I prefer to talk about what things actually mean, the way they are said, and what they are lead to, actual tangible consequences.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Amin asks, you gave a lot of historical facts and theories, but do you think history can be used to solve these unexpected events? And I'm going. Do you think the latest developments with the ICJ's initial ruling and the accusations against UNRWA will change the support of the left?
That's a great question. No, I think that history does nothing. History is not going to solve anything. One of the things that I came to dislike the most about this conflict is how much really history is weaponized by everybody. Everybody has a historical narrative, and there's almost a delusion if I really get the history right and I tell it to people, the power of reason in that historical story is kind of, establish my legitimacy, establish my right, and it's going to solve the problem. I don't think it's true at all. As much as that matters for the public battles about public opinions, I don't think no amount of correct history it can really solve these issues, or solve this. This issue will be solved if you're talking about on the ground. And I hate to say these things because I like to think of myself as somebody who's an intellectual who wants to end up in a university smoking my pipe and talking about useless things. But the truth is, I do believe on the ground these things will be solved with concrete military measures in terms of achieving security. After you're done with that, then there are politicians and diplomats who can pressure, who can extract concessions, who can try to get Israel a more manageable a set of relations with its neighbors. But in terms of history solving this, in terms of public opinion, I honestly don't think it's possible. And I'm sorry to be so pessimistic about this.
It's your opinion, so pessimism is probably realism here. So we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Mr. Mansour, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Stacey. I appreciate it.
Of course. For our viewers, please join us Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks again.